Hello, CFL fans. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci of CFL Talk. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV, channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download the app, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Now joining me on CFL Talk, as usual, David Morassutti, and we have a special guest in Mark Stephen. Mark Stephen is in Calgary. Mark has been a little busy. There's a lot going on in Calgary, so it's great to have you here. You know, if it wasn't for today, we'd be talking about Bo Levi Mitchell. Instead, we're talking about the whole management team. First of all, Mark, it's important to understand that we're seeing a generational change in the Calgary Stampeders.
You bet. It's, they generally, and thanks for having me, make a point of having a succession plan and having things lined up in an orderly way. And that's what they did here today. I knew there'd been a talk and discussion about what John Hufnagel's next move was going to be when he would step aside. I mean, he is 71. And, that isn't as old as it used to be. But the point I'm trying to make is that's getting on. And they wanted a succession plan in place. So this is the plan they have in place. And they put it together today and announced it today. So it is significant, though. You know, John Hufnagel's been the general manager of the team since almost 15 years ago to the day when he was brought back to Calgary to run the Stampeders.
Mark,
David?
is this we've seen teams kind of start to do this a little bit. You know, Hamilton did it with Orlando Steinauer, making him both de facto, like a general manager, and I think he's a vice president of Hamilton and a head coach. Do you feel like this is something that teams are doing more so for a specific reason? And in Calgary's case, is this something that that Dickinson really wanted to do, was pushing for?
Well, two things. Number one, you nailed it that, succession planning, having a plan in place long term is a very desirable goal. I mean, Winnipeg's doing it as well. They have had a plan in place, kept their people in place, and they're near the top. Hamilton has a plan in place. Basically, Orlando Steinauer runs everything. To Dave Dickinson specifically, I mean, was he pushing forward? I don't know if I'd use that word, but I would say that, I think it's the next natural step and evolution in a guy that's been with the Stampeders almost continuously since the late 90s. So it was the next logical step for him. And with John Hufnagel nearing retirement age, it just seemed like the logical time to make the move. Whether it was going to happen this year or in a year or two, I'm not sure. But it was just the logical time. And Dave Dickinson will now step into the big shoes of his predecessor, John Hufnagel. And I guess for a guy that mentored him a long time, Wally Buono.
You know, it's funny. He joked that he's never been fired. He's only been hired.
Well, then he corrected that and said as a player he was in the NFL. He got kicked around.
Yeah, and the player he was, of course.
No, that's right. And that's quite amazing, isn't it? He's been here as an assistant coach since 2008 when he came as a player, then became a coach. And then he's moved up into a coordinator. And now he's moved up into head coach. Now he's the general manager. So it's been a gradual ascent. Maybe not a lot of people get that opportunity, but he's taken advantage of it. And, he gets the chance to run the team as he sees fit.
Mark, I don't know if if you have an answer to this question. Both David and I were scratching our heads a little bit about it. Would this be advantageous financially for the team in regards to the management cap? The fact that John moves completely up into the upper portion of the team, where he isn't affected by the cap, and it gives them a little more financial reward for the head coach and then others in the organization.
Oh, I certainly think that played a role in it for sure. John Hufnagel still is going to do some football consulting. Does that count as a charge against the cap? But, John Hufnagel was well paid when it was under the auspices of the salary management cap. So, I would say there's some savings there. And I think there's an opportunity to pay Dave Dickinson more than strictly as the head coach, and maybe pay some of the assistants a little more and give them a chance to grow within the Calgary system as well. So it certainly didn't hurt. Let's put it that way. Was it the sole reason they did it? I'm not going to say that, but it certainly, I believe, did play a role, yes.
It's very interesting. Like, the coach's cap has really changed how teams can make hires. We're seeing, finally the Saskatchewan Roughriders were able to announce their offensive coordinator after apparently offering the job to at least 3 or 4 other candidates. Do you think that money played a factor in maybe some of these um, other candidates not going to Saskatchewan? Because we know that they just cleared a lot of names in terms of coaching over there. Do you feel like the coaches cap has? And we've been a big proponent against the coaches cap on this show. I'm just wondering, do you think it's really harmed a lot of teams more than it's helped teams?
Yes, I do, and I hear what you're saying that there's a formula for when a player, or sorry, a manager or coach is fired, and the money that they're paying him counts against the cap. It's kind of a convoluted process. I mean, I know why they brought it in. There was a feeling that management was getting far too rich while the players weren't earning much, but I do believe it's handcuffed some teams. It probably didn't help Edmonton last year, and I don't know exactly what the solution is. I mean, the fact is that some teams, i.e., Saskatchewan, were just paying anybody and everything for a few years. Now they can't do that. So I'm sure it impacted some of the movement. Yeah, you're not going to, be able to negotiate as a coach as freely as you could if there was no cap in place.
Yeah, no, we talk about it as David said. At the end of the day, though, you raised the most important and salient point, which is the players, as we all know, at the top of their complaints when it came to bargaining time was always the coaches and how come their contracts are guaranteed. I'm sure they weren't hoping that the coaches' contracts would become more like theirs. They were hoping their contracts would become more like the coaches.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the solution is because you've certainly nailed a dilemma there. I got to be honest. Why things go this way with coaches' contracts, they don't go that way with players' contracts. So, yeah, it's a bit of a conundrum. And I don't know if the cap, as currently constructed for the coaches, is the route to go, but they've got something in place, but I still think there's some work to be done to massage that because it is certainly impacting teams and their ability to make moves. I mean, if a team just doesn't want to keep the current management team in place, shouldn't that be the primary obligation as opposed to how much it's going to count against the cap for the next group? So I have a bit of a problem with it, but I don't have a solution either.
I'm wondering, when you look at teams in other leagues when they're making these moves, a lot of it comes down to the guaranteed money that's paid out to these coaches that they have on the staff. Like teams saying, do we want to be paying out the guaranteed money and then having to go and hire and spend more money on another coach? I feel like that already a lot of teams probably don't want to do. Putting a cap, I don't think that was ever really a solution. It just doesn't really help the product because we've seen teams have to hire a coach and then say, well, I guess we can't have a quarterbacks coach because we needed a defensive coordinator more. We needed a special teams coordinator more. Like that's where I have the problem with it. Teams will ultimately, when they look at the financial impact of hiring and firing coach, I think in the CFL, teams are not just going to be blowing money away on coaches left, right, and center. The economics of this league has changed so much, and that teams aren't as willing to do it anymore. That's why I think that I think the cap kind of curbed that behavior a little bit, in my opinion. And maybe now it's time for the CFL to rethink getting rid of it. What better time maybe to discuss this at the winter meetings are coming up in your neck of the woods next month?
Yeah, I'll be up there for those. So I'm looking forward to them. But no, there's no question about it. Teams have to be smart about how they spend their money. And if they're tied up in contracts they don't like, that's not ideal. Contracts they've been backed into a corner because they didn't have many options. You wonder when they were sitting down with the players and talking if it wasn't sort of a throwaway negotiation point that never really was fleshed out. They just, the players would say, well, look, the coaches, look, they're making all this money. How come? You say, well, we'll put a cap in there too. And maybe the full implications, 2 years and 3 years and 5 years down the line weren't fully fleshed out. I have to think that's an issue for sure.
There is another issue that screams at me. It really screams at me. Is there's a big question too. Now I don't have the answer. I mean, between the three of us, we could probably come up with half an answer, but I'll try and throw up my 5% of that. I think possibly one has to ask, what's harder to find, a CFL coach or a CFL player? And I think in there would be the answer to how much pressure there would be to change it back or leave it the way it is. And I'm talking about the management cap.
So if you're asking, I mean,
Yep.
it's probably find a CFL coach, a coach that understands the CFL game. There's lots of coaches out there that can coach, but to understand and succeed in the CFL, which is a different ball game, it's probably a little different. And that's why, guys like John Huffnagel, Dave Dickinson, or Mike O'Shea are able to stay. They've learned the CFL and the nuances, and that's why Chris Jones keeps getting rehired. They understand it. So it's probably a little different, not to find a coach, but to find a CFL coach who embraces things such as the ratio, 12 on the field. So it's probably that way a little tougher, although, finding the right players too is quite a challenge.
Yeah, I know that the players, I feel like, the players were trying so hard to make teams kind of, I wouldn't say disciplined, but just make them realize, what I like about what the players are doing is now they're pushing for those at least partially guaranteed contracts. I think that was a big win for them in this latest CBA negotiation, because you're here now. I would still like to see salaries being made public, just because I think when you're and contract details, don't even need to make salaries, known. I think fans would like to know, how long is this player sticking with our team for, right? Fans kind of like to play a little armchair GM once in a while. I think the league that takes away a little bit of that imagination when it comes to the off season, right? We're playing guessing it. Luckily, the CFL does announce who's a free agent at the end of the season, but it does help the storylines throughout the season to know what's really at stake for a team. Who are the guys that are maybe on a one and done sort of deal here? Because, when it comes to the end of the season, they got to spend money elsewhere. So I think players have done a good job of pushing to get those partially guaranteed contracts. I think they could have pushed a little bit more for a few other things to help themselves a little bit, in my opinion.
So you're thinking full disclosure, as in, everybody's published. I don't know if that would fly, but maybe some more transparency on some of the higher profile players and that. And just further to your point, though, one of the problems has been, and I hope this guaranteed contract or partial guarantee alleviates it. There's just, with the 1-year contracts that have come into force, there are so many free agents. I mean, you almost assume that a guy is a free agent unless you hear otherwise. And I think that's been a problem as well for players and contracts as well, that, it may sound appealing to be a free agent after this year. And I'm sure it is at one level, but at the same time, if everybody's a free agent, how many defensive backs hit the market at the same time? And are you bidding against yourself for that? I don't know. I don't have the answer. I'm not a player, but it's something to consider.
I just wanted to add one more thought when it comes to the coach's cap, not really about the cap, but about the management of the cap. It's really important that you don't fire anybody. And what we see, one of the advantages that Calgary, Winnipeg, and the successful teams are having is when they make decisions on coaches, on people who are going to work for the team, and they stay, they don't leave, because the management cap punishes teams for making bad decisions. I don't know if that's an unfair question, but I think that's what it does.
Yeah, it does. You're right. It'd be nice if everybody could have the stability of a Calgary or a Winnipeg or other teams, but doesn't always work that way. And every year somebody's going to finish at or near the basement and feel a lot of heat from their fans and the board, if they're a community-owned team or whomever, to make changes. So it's just an inevitable part of sports that losing teams have to find the right formula, and that may mean changing the coaches.
Yeah, that rule really put the continuity into successful teams in the Canadian Football League. They both run in the same track.
Mm-hmm. A lot of that for sure. Yeah. So we'll see, but it is a tough thing to navigate when that's something staring you in the face when a team has to make some big decisions.
But Mark, so with this move in Calgary, this is we've seen a kind of changing of the guards a little bit here. Now you have Huffnagel kind of giving some of the reins to Dickinson more than we've seen him in the past. Levi Mitchell seemingly doing it with Jake Mayer. What's the feeling like in Calgary now with all this going on?
Well, you're right. It certainly are some pretty fundamental changes. I mean, these are two, seminal figures in teams' history. John Huffnagel and Bo Levi Mitchell both have moved on into new roles. However, I think there still is a great deal of faith that whatever decisions they made, they'll get it right. They've established that level of trust and backed it up generally with results. So, yes, there is some concern about it. Yes, it is very noticeable because of the profile of the people that have moved on. But there's a feeling that the Stampeders have done it. They weren't rushed into this. This wasn't something that they just woke up this morning and decided it would be a good idea to do. They've been planning and discussing it. And as a result, they've come up with these changes. But no, there's no question. It's a very dramatic and radical overhaul of the team. However, they've earned the trust of their fans. And I think this is one more time, and that trust will be rewarded.
Do me a favor, expand for us the name Brendan Mahoney. Who is he? How did he work his way to being assistant GM?
Okay, well, Brendan is a guy that played. He's from Cochrane, which is a city just west of Calgary. Played high school football there, then went to Simon Fraser University for 4 years, then came back. He came here as on a tryout basis, but he was a guy that didn't make the team. A little bit of time on the practice roster, but they talked to him about, would you want to help out evaluating talent, watching some games and a few things if you want to stay in football. He spoke to Jim Barker, who was then with the team, about doing some work, and it just carried on from there. He's a very bright guy, very well regarded, very well liked, has his contacts primarily in the Canadian game, primarily in the West, but, he does a lot of other evaluation of U.S. talent as well. But, he's a guy that's just worked his way up, puts his nose down, and gets to work, and has been rewarded with promotion. He's done some negotiating of contracts too, so this will be another step in his career to be the assistant general manager.
Was there any concern about any? Now, Dickinson did say that, and I believe it was actually you that reported that more changes could be coming to this team because there's still some vacancies in the in around the CFL. Who are you potentially concerned, or who are maybe the Stampeders concerned about losing over the next few months?
Well, I know whether it happens this year or not, there's a feeling that the longtime special team coordinator, Mark Killam, is eventually going to get a head coaching job. It hasn't happened yet, but there's a feeling his time is coming very soon. There's also a feeling that Mark Mueller, who is, he helps coordinate the play calling during games, doesn't actually do it. He's the grandson of Ron Lancaster, and he grew up around football. Funny thing is, most guys go to summer camp when they're 8, 9, and 10 years old. His summer camp was at the Hamilton Tiger Cats camp. So he hung around there and is very, very well regarded as a great football mind. I don't think he's going anywhere this year, but I think in time he will. Specifically as to who David Dickinson was referencing, I'm not sure because there's only one staff that really needs to be filled out right now, and that's pretty much Montreal. And there aren't a lot of ties between the Alouettes and the Stampeders, but I guess we'll just wait and see. But those are guys that eventually I think are going to move on. Assistant coach Pat Delmonico, who does much of the offensive coordinator heavy lifting work right now, is also very well regarded. So I don't think any of those guys are going anywhere this year. I could be wrong. Maybe the Owls are going to jump in and fill the coaching staff with people from here. Maybe Ottawa's got a couple of vacancies, but those are some of the candidates in time that will move on.
I don't think there's any openings here in Toronto, right?
No,
no, there's no. So there's a place where Calgary folks.
Everybody else just seems to end up there.
Stanza, who Toronto took from Calgary, he was from Calgary and went to Winnipeg, then ended up in Toronto. Was one of those candidates for the Saskatchewan offensive coordinator job, and he declined it. Maybe he's looking at maybe a head coaching gig or something more in Montreal. I don't know. Do you guys have any idea who you think would be the front runner for that Montreal job?
I still think it's Jason Moss. Him and Machocha had a great relationship, great time in Edmonton. He admires him and likes him, and I guess he didn't have great success in Edmonton, but maybe a guy Moss will change and do things better or differently in a second go around. But I think it's Jason Moss who's probably going to be the front runner. Is there anybody else, a dark horse candidate? Don't know, but I think Jason Moss is the front runner.
Well, Harris and Jason Moss spent some time together too,
Hmm.
so there's an understanding of each other,
Hmm.
and we know that Montreal made a pretty surprising decision this year in making to me anyway. I was surprised how easily the transition went, to Harris as the number one quarterback.
Yeah, I was too, actually. I got to give him credit for bouncing back from a guy that seemingly was finished. I wondered if there was another opportunity for him, but I thought, yeah, I think he did quite well. And it's up to them, but I would bring him back if it was my decision to make, as long as they can get a deal done. I'd bring him back between, him, Harris, and Stanback, who missed most of the year with an injury, and Eugene Lewis. That's a pretty good starting group to start working around. I think they're quite talented. Truthfully, I think the last couple of years they've underachieved. I think they've got more talent than their record has showed. So let's see, and maybe whoever gets the challenge, I think, starts out with a pretty good situation.
Can we drill down into Calgary and how the season went? Going into the season, for those of us on the outside, we're wondering, the question of Bo Levi Mitchell was on everybody's mind. We all were aware of the injury concerns that he had. We were all aware of, he hasn't had as much success as he did previously. Going into this season, it really felt like a rebuild year. Was it really surprising that Jake Meyer took the reins as easily as it seemed from the outside?
Well, I guess the fact is he'd been in with the system. If you're a quarterback in Calgary, you get the best coaching in the league between Dickinson, Mueller, and Huffnagel around as well. So he was ready for the challenge. Bo's production was really slipping, and they decided to go with the change. So, I guess it went quite well. Although Jake Mayer is not a finished product just yet. He didn't have a great playoff game against BC, but no, I guess I'm not surprised. And he played a lot the year before, and in 2021. So, yeah, I think there's a situation where he was ready for the challenge, maybe not completely ready, but, they committed to him midseason when they decided to give him the big contract and that. So, Bo Levi Mitchell, I believe, slipped. And yes, I'm sure the injuries had something to do with it. But, Jake Mayer, I think, was ready for the challenge. They also had to come eventually to a decision because his contract, that's Mayer's, and Bo Levi's contract, were lining up to both expire in February, and they didn't want to be caught short. So this decision was coming sooner or later, maybe a little sooner than some thought, but it came.
Yeah, it's such a bizarre situation. Like Calgary. It's funny because Frank and I talked a lot about Calgary this year, and I kept saying, no, there's a team you can never count out. There's a team you can never rule out. But now, do you feel like a lot of the teams in the West may be in a holding pattern to see what happens with Nathan Rourke and BC? And if that could potentially be an opening, I know Winnipeg will always be seen as the favorite for the next little bit, but is that another situation where a team is just like, we could potentially take advantage a little bit here if unfortunately for BC, if things change a little bit there.
Well, yeah, I hear you, and we'll see how it goes with Rourke. He's obviously getting a lot of different looks, isn't he, around the NFL with different teams. I'm sure that'll influence some teams, but they're going to inevitably have to make their own decisions, decide which way they're going to go, with or without Nathan Rourke. So, but it's tough. He's a tremendous player. I don't think Vernon Adams is ready to take the mantle there, but let's see how it goes with him. But no, I wouldn't think teams are going to sit around and wait to see what goes on because, free agency begins in roughly 2 months. So they better be ready and hit the ground running with whatever plans they have and not be looking over their shoulders at the BC Lions.
Mark, when the preseason started this year, watching Calgary, I put a characterization on the team as a team that was playing angry. And by angry, I mean motivated. And they were really, I'll be honest, I think they were pissed about what happened the year before. And they weren't going to let it happen this year. It was a very, like right from day one, it was a focused organization, wasn't it?
Yes, I would agree, and that focus came out throughout the course of the year. I mean, we're talking about things that didn't happen. They did win 12 games this year, and there's only one team that won more games than them. That was the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They were tied with BC. Their Snaps' biggest problem is they lost their games to teams above them in the standings. So, no, I would agree. There was an era of redemption. They thought the 21 West semifinal Regina, they gassed it. They didn't. It wasn't Saskatchewan that beat them. It's the Stampeders that beat themselves. So I think there's an element of that for sure. And they came to redeem themselves that they hadn't done the job, and they came into the season with a rejuvenated attitude. Kadeem Carey running out of the backfield, a very explosive force. So yeah, I do think they had an air of redemption about them, and wanted to get back on top, not near the top, on top.
So what do you feel like they really need to do? Like we see they're starting to bring back players like Reggie Begelton. He's back in the fold. But what do you feel like Calgary needs to do to get back to that, to be seen as that top echelon team?
Well, immediately free agency, they've got 3 elite free agents on defense. Can they sign all of, in no particular order, Cam Judge, the linebacker, Flo Ormalad on the line, and his pal at the other end of the line, Sean Lemon. I thought all 3 were tremendous last year. Do they have the money to keep all 3? Not sure. I'm sure there'd be other teams that would be hunting down those guys. So those are some of the things that immediately they need to do to restock their roster. They probably need a little more depth at the Canadian offensive line positions, and that's one area that I think they could work on. Also, maybe a little more depth in their secondary. They went through multiple secondaries this year in every game, rarely dressing the same group 2 in a row. So those would be 2 of the areas, and obviously Jake Maier is going to have to take the next step. I mean, he doesn't have Bo Levi Mitchell look over at the bench anymore to see if he's going to be available and helpful. He's going to have to do it. Can he do it? Sure, there's reason to think he can. But this is different. I mean, the last 2 years, he's been with the team. Now he comes in, and he is the number 1 guy. This is not something you can go out there and work at training camp and get ready for the season. It's going to be right on his shoulders the minute he gets back for training camp.
Remember what I said about Calgary this year coming out of training camp? They came in angry because they felt like like you said, they basically dropped the ball, literally and figuratively. Gee, I wonder how Myers going to come into next year's training camp. Is it going to rub off on him, that attitude?
Yeah,
where
sure it should. I mean,
absolutely,
he did not play very well at the BC game. Let's not the semifinal game. Let's not kid anybody here. And there's a lot of untimely penalties, turnovers. BC didn't make any turnovers or penalties, and I know it's the old cliche that if you win the turnover and the penalty battle, you generally win the game. But that's exactly what happened in the West semifinal. But yeah, Jake Maier's got to play better, no doubt about that. He did not have. That was his worst game of the year. Was in the playoffs.
Yeah, the easiest thing, right, David? We see with Fajardo and other quarterbacks that they get on the lip or cusp of success, and somehow they just can't get over that speed bump.
Yeah, it gets to a point where you don't want to change because everything has worked for so long, but then you're kind of getting the similar results, and something eventually will have to change. Otherwise, you're just you kind of get stuck in the mud there. You kind of get stuck in the middle. Calgary, in a lot of cases, there are games where it felt like they could have easily have won certain games, right? And I think that's more so in some cases that's what's happened. But I do like that they have tried their best to make these sweeping changes, but not change the identity of how they want to play and what they're trying to do there. I think maybe the biggest change for me, is seeing how their running game has become so prevalent in their offense. Just because you don't have a Bo Levi Mitchell throwing the ball 50 times a game and, carving up secondaries. Now, Jake Maier has done a very good job. I will admit that. But you can sort of see that Calgary's sort of shifted, but not totally changed how exactly they want to play.
Well, certainly they do have the top ground game in the league as far as I'm concerned, with Kadeem Carey and then Dedrick Mills and Peyton Logan. Those are 3 tremendous acquisitions for the team. Carey's the centerpiece of the offense, though. He's the guy that's going to carry them as far as they go. So you're right. They're kind of a run-first team. You look at the stats they do on first downs and throughout the course of the year, run more than anyone else. So, yeah, it is a very potent attack with some very, very productive players that they had this year. And Kadeem Carey is a real bruising handful for all other 8 teams in the league.
Yeah, well, defenses are there for a reason, and offenses, they take what the defense gives them. And then on the other hand, there's also the point that a team has its strengths and has to know how to apply those strengths and make them work. Here in Toronto, we had a pretty good running game to watch. We had a team. When I think of Jake Meyer, I think of Bethel Thompson. Not that they don't have the same history by any stretch. That's not what I mean. What I do mean, though, is they have really good teams that could win a Grey Cup with a little help from them, and that's where Jake Meyer has to step in. I think here in Toronto, I don't know how you saw it. Toronto almost, I think, got lucky in the Grey Cup that he actually got hurt, because they were getting into a little hole there in the fourth quarter, and then when their young quarterback came in, he made some plays that I don't think Bethel Thompson could have made. My point being, to David's point, where Winnipeg's was the best running team, but they figured out another way to get to the Grey Cup, as we witnessed. Calgary, if Meyer improves and have that running game, that'll be a pretty potent offense.
Oh yeah, I agree totally. It's a good ground game, and you've got Malik Henry, a speedster receiver who's inked through 2025. Bagleton is back, so I think the offense will return largely the same as it was last year when it was very productive. I mean, them and BC were the two most productive teams in the league. The key to the Stampeders' success, one of them, is they were very opportunistic in taking the ball away and then scoring on them. So those are some things they did well, but no question about it. And you touched on Bethel Thompson. Well, I think it's been a real credit to Ryan Dinwiddie to really work with him. And Dinwiddie's the guy that spotted Jake Mayer here, so he kind of got the ball rolling on two quarterbacks there.
What do you make of Mark? You probably knew Ryan Dinwiddie more than we did for all his time in Calgary. What did you make of him finally, him reaching that Grey Cup and winning in the Grey Cup? What did you make of that? As somebody who's probably followed how his whole journey from Calgary to Toronto.
Well, very exciting. I had the Argos right from day one of camp as the team coming out of the East. He's a very meticulous guy. He's made some mistakes, and he seems to have a shocking number of critics and cynics about him in Toronto. All I can say is that it's been a long time since Toronto's hosted consecutive Eastern finals, but he's a good communicator. He hired a tremendous staff and let them work with them. Turns out most of them had ties to Calgary, but there are a lot of good coaches on that staff. So I think he did a really good job. And can I sit here and say I thought he'd win a Grey Cup 2 years after leaving Calgary? No, but I thought he would certainly lead the Argos to success. I'm not surprised that they have had success, and he's a big reason for it. I think he's a guy that maybe now can silence those that snipe at him away, because I think he's done a good job.
Hindsight's 2020, so it's really easy now to say, well, he was a lot better than we thought. At the time, the criticism that he felt and was heaped on him was mostly because of, I don't know, it's like when he made a mistake, it was a clearly visible mistake. Like when it came to calls from the sideline, he wants to change a play the referees make, challenge. He wasn't very successful in that. He was, it was pointed out that he made some bad decisions that you wouldn't expect from a head coach of the Canadian Football League with experience. But somehow that stuff almost hijacked everything else that he was doing that was so good, that you pointed out about McLeod Bethel Thompson. And his biggest quality, as far as I'm concerned, Ryan Dinwiddie's biggest quality, he has a knack for picking great assistant coaches, and he sets the table for them to be successful. I think he deserves a lot of credit for all the great words that have been said about the people who are working under him.
I agree, and I think that's very well said, that he's just picked the right people. Yes, he's made some decisions that have looked a little boneheaded at times, and I'm sure he'd do over if he had a chance. And there were some growing pains. I don't dispute that, but like I say, the Argos have hosted the last two East finals. They've won a Grey Cup. Their record has been good in both of those years. So full marks to him. And, Pinball Clemens deserves some credit for picking him as well, because, he was, let's be honest, he wasn't the offensive coordinator with Calgary. He's a quarterback's coach, but he applied and made the right impression and carried that on. So good for him, and good for the Argos for sticking with him, and they've been rewarded.
Oh, they definitely have been, and we the big thing I guess in the East, and I mean as somebody from the West, I know there's been a lot of talk about can the East finally have a little more success during the regular season. Were you are what did you think of those who were saying that the CFL should scrap the East West divisions and just have one standing and the top teams just make it through?
Well, here we go. A 12-win team was knocked out in the first round of the playoffs, while an 11-win team sat and had a bye. Fill in the blanks. So in the first round, either Calgary or BC was going to go. So yeah, I'm struggling with the two division format now. I won't lie to you. You know, Argos maybe would have won it under whatever format there was, but you know, I do wonder a little bit about it because I know to preserve the old East-West tradition, I get that, but that's out the door now with the crossover. It hasn't happened yet, but is it unthinkable that one of these years could be a BC Calgary Grey Cup in Hamilton? I don't know. It could happen. I'm not
I
saying
think
it
that's
will.
I think that's an interesting little twist that's hanging out there waiting to happen, and it is a challenge for being the crossover team to go to
Oh
the
yeah.
other side and to win because of, you're a visiting team, but on steroids. You're a visiting team big time, and so it's a big challenge. But I'm going to defend the Eastern Division by saying this: the Eastern Division this year was much better than it's been in past years. Having said that, the best team in the East for the past few years, or that was the best team in the past few years, Hamilton, really struggled. So, if Hamilton was a shadow of its former self, the Eastern Division, you wouldn't have had the ability to say what you said, that an 11-win team would have lost in the first round, because there would have been another 11-win team on the East Division
Mm-hmm.
side as well. So I think, in my opinion, I'd like to put this out there, is that I think the Eastern Division is stronger than it's ever been in at least the past 2 decades. And I don't think I'm exaggerating.
Well, I guess they won the Grey Cup, so full marks to them. And Hamilton pushed Winnipeg to overtime in the prior year's Grey Cup. So yeah, I'm not saying there aren't good teams or good players, but as a collective, I mean, it was fairly one-sided this year as to who was beating who. And of course, Ottawa had their season-long struggles, but somebody's going to struggle every year. So I guess we'll see. But obviously, this year there was quite a disparity. But Toronto came out. Maybe they would have been the better team no matter what format was used.
Yeah, I don't totally disagree with your thought there, Mark, because I don't like there to be any sort of asterisk. Like people say there should be an asterisk on, a team that wins. I think back to even 2017 when the Argos won that Grey Cup. They weren't the best. Like they weren't among the best teams in the CFL. They had a little, they got the, a little bit lucky with the bye. It's just I think with the problem here is actually what it would help is it would make the regular season mean a lot more because the team in the East doesn't. And look, if you talk to the guys on the teams, they know that they gotta do their best. They're not exactly just sitting around and hoping, maybe we can just sneak in. I know that's not their thought process either. But I also look at these East teams and they just haven't found that model of consistency that the West have found. A lot of it has to do with look at the teams that are successful in the West and them being able to keep that continuity, really push to get the right talent there. I think the East is, as Frank mentioned, it's slowly getting there. I mean, the Argos did win 11 games this year. That's something
Mm-hmm.
that many, could not say about the Argos a few years ago. But yeah, if let's say the Argos go from being an 11-win team and then they make the playoffs and they win, let's say 8 games, that does add a little bit, I think, of cachet to that idea that maybe we should be putting more emphasis on being good in the regular season because it should
Yeah.
mean something. And I think maybe sometimes that gets lost in the shuffle a little bit.
Well,
Yeah, I
we've
hear
got
you.
tons. Go
I
ahead.
was just going
Sorry.
to say,
Sorry.
you mentioned 17. I want to pick up on that. Let's not forget, in the 17 East final, it was Saskatchewan at Toronto. And, the Rough Riders really pushed the Argos. The Argos didn't win that game until the last minute. So we were just a few minutes away from a Saskatchewan Calgary Grey Cup in Ottawa. So I know they make it tough for a crossover team to get there, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it can happen. And one of these years, it's got to happen. I don't know when that year is, but I'm convinced it'll happen one of these years.
Well, I guess the point I was trying to make with the Eastern Division was that if Hamilton had played more like they played the past few years, there wouldn't have been a question about the crossover. Before this year, there's always been a question about the crossover. The crossover was always in the equation, and the only reason it was this year is because Hamilton totally took a nosedive. They were they were a team that were winning 12 and 13 and 14 games, right? And then they became a team that was fighting for their life to make it and not let the Western team, by the way, coincidentally, Saskatchewan again, make it to the Eastern Division playoffs. So yeah, no, that's the only thing that I can say is I do see a light at the end of the tunnel. A lot of people who are criticizing the Canadian Football League, and the one thing I love to remind people about is that in both semifinals in the East and the West, any of the four quarterbacks that were playing in those games could have been a Grey Cup champ, and I could see them raising the Grey Cup. That hasn't
Yeah, I
happened in a
agree.
long time.
No, it's and you're right. Hamilton, they struggled for much of the year, but once they got their confidence back, in which I think they lost it, they certainly played well and discovered a running game. So they were playing their best football at the end of the year. So maybe they'll bounce back, and maybe their time is next year to reclaim the top of the East, because they did win 15 games in 19. We can't lose sight of that too, and that's a huge achievement.
They just didn't win the Grey Cup. I guess because Eastern teams need to be less than 500 to win a Grey Cup until the last.
Yeah,
because whenever you mention Ottawa, I'm sure that gets in the saddle of some Calgary fans a little bit.
17 loss in Ottawa to Toronto was way worse. I got to tell you, neither was great, but the Ottawa game was way worse. So.
Yeah, and it's amazing. For those of us that actually watch the games and are there to see it, not flipping channels, it's amazing how history can change the way the last or second last play of the game goes.
Oh,
in the past years.
Everywhere. Yeah, you just don't know what
every Grey Cup. Like this year wasn't a surprise. That's what isn't that what happens all the time?
Look at what's the narrative surrounding Smith for Toronto now? He was this great game-saving hero instead of being a goat for roughing the passer play. It's just it's so much pressure and focus on the Grey Cup. One play, one moment can define your legacy.
I know it's funny that you mentioned how 2017 hurt more. Was that more so because they gave away? That you felt like they gave away the win?
Yes, it was down the stretch. They had it there, and it just completely unraveled on them down the stretch. So that's why
that one. The key things that unraveled it.
Well, they threw the interception in the end zone. They allowed Toronto to come back earlier in the game. Vaughn had that 102-yard fumble recovery. How do you do that on a snowy field like that? Tommy Campbell, who'd been so good all season, got burned by Deontay Spencer. Let's give Spencer the credit. Toronto was 9-9. Let's not, they weren't great. So that's what the reason why that one stung even more. Just that it got away on them so badly at the end there, and through the interception. You mentioned a guy making his legacy on a play. Look, Matt Black had a nice career with Toronto, but I think he's best remembered for a game-saving interception in that Grey Cup game. So it's just that 16. The one they lost in overtime to Ottawa. If you really stretch it, that one hurt. Don't get me wrong, but if you really stretch it, you can say Ottawa was right at their best. Henry Burris, a great veteran, right at the top of his game, could run down the Stampeders, and he did, and it did go to overtime. But neither's very good. Don't get me wrong.
That's a game that you lost literally by a shoe.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. It's still talked about. Yeah, Abdul Kaday knocking it down. Yeah,
that's as close as the fingertip and the shoe. That's what ended that game. And to the point that I was trying to make is that we when history comes, we don't discuss how close the game was, just who won. The result of the game does not reflect the game, is what I'm saying. And that's the tragedy of sport, isn't it? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's what players and teams carry throughout the off season, and for that matter, into their careers. When stuff like that happens, it's unforgettable.
Yeah, very much so. It's so much focus on so many plays, just one or two here or there in a Grey Cup game can turn it. And that's where somebody writes their legacy or, has it written for them if it's a bad play. So, yeah, it's tough. It's very demanding. And, that's why the Grey Cup game this year was so compelling. There was so much just changing second by second in those last few minutes there. It was certainly one of the great Grey Cups ever.
I was going to ask about that Grey Cup. Just you both were there. I was watching from home. What was the energy like in the stadium in those moments?
I'll just speak from my perspective. I thought the people were just stunned. And I mean that in a nice way. They didn't know what they were seeing, that things were shifting so badly. Winnipeg looked like they were going to win the thing. They were going to lose the thing. Toronto, I mean, you can often go seasons without seeing a blocked kick. You saw two in a couple of minutes. I just think there was just people were just
Back to
stunned.
back.
I know in the press box, I think people were stunned. They didn't realize what they were going to have to report about. And I think it was the same. I got the sense the same thing in the stands, that people just really couldn't keep up with all the crazy developments that were happening on a play-by-play basis.
I can answer that question, David, with total accuracy, because I was downstairs waiting to go on to the field. And as you know, Mark, and I think you know, David, as well, that the last couple of minutes of the game, the media that wants to be on the field to do interviews or go into locker rooms goes down and waits in the tunnel. We can't really see everything that's going on. Good fortune was that the play was, you could see it through the tunnel because that's where the play was. But the only evidence I had of what was going on was the cheering. But like you said, Mark, there were a lot of oohs and ahs. Like,
Yeah,
it wasn't just cheering. It was like gasps,
what the
because
heck?
I haven't heard that many gasps at a football game, at
Yeah,
any sporting event for that
yeah.
matter.
No, I agree. I think people realized they were seeing something just crazy. Just I guess that's why you go to the stadium every day, to see something you haven't seen before. And we saw
That's
about
right.
6 never been seen before. It's all in a row there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was a crazy game. It's when TSN sits down to do their next, top 10 Grey Cup games ever. To me, that one's got to be on there
Yeah.
for the
And
fourth quarter
it
alone.
had a tough one to beat the year before,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
The
it'll be an
volleyball
overtime one.
interception.
One of a handful of overtime games ever in history. I think there's
Yeah,
only been
absolutely. There's a lot to pick from.
4 or 5 or something like that. Anyway,
We're very, a lot of people are very negative about the Canadian Football League, and I think sometimes, rather than look at the game, we listen to what people's interpretation of the game is that don't watch it. That's the part that frustrates me more than anything as a person who covers the Canadian Football League. The negative commentary is totally from people who don't watch the game, who don't participate and understand what the Canadian Football League is about. It's all about preconceived notions, and they're false.
I think it's a heavy dose of that. I agree totally that it's easy to knock the CFL, sit in the comfort of your living room, but I'm not one of those guys, so I struggle
Yeah.
to know where they come from with those viewpoints
Yeah,
too.
I
But you're right,
don't.
a lot of it is just knee jerk.
Absolutely.
But
Now, the question here then, okay, this is some of these people have these preconceived notions about the CFL. What can allow that to change? What does the league need to do to change that?
it's a pretty profound question. Randy Ambrosi should be here as well.
There you
But
go.
Could be one way.
I think that's one place you can start, Mark, is where we have a commissioner that spends a little more time talking about the game and pumping it up, and spending a little more time talking to whomever wants to talk about the game with him. He's been pretty invisible the last couple of years.
yeah, I'm sure that would help too, and maybe drop this whole global thing and concentrate on a few other issues, and to me, maybe build a stronger relationship with youth sports. They kind of operate somewhat independently of each other. That'd be one. Two, I wonder if, and you guys know better, get the Argos out of BMO Field, put it in a more suburban location like York. I don't know if that's even possible. University. Because they suffer by comparison being downtown to other teams, but there's tons. I mean, I think the GTA produces more football players than anywhere just by virtue of population. And, maybe they have to move out of there to get the biggest market somewhat fired up about it. And, lots of other things.
Well, here's a message I can give you, Mark, and I can tell you that I can say this with a modicum of sincerity, obviously, and also fact. The best sign that I saw in the Argos this year was the Eastern Final. The Eastern Final was as populated as maybe a little more populated than the game against Hamilton the year before. Keeping in mind that a very large percentage of the people who were at the game the year before were Hamilton Tiger Cat fans. This year, there were a handful of Montreal fans, but there were far more fans that came from Toronto that came to watch the Argos play. They saw a really good game, and they had a Grey Cup. The problem over the years with the Toronto Argonauts was identified by Pinball Clemens when he came back, and he said it appropriately, accurately, and factually. And that is that the problem with the Argos has been over the years, they win a Grey Cup and then they play like crap the following year. That's not how you build a fan base. And they might, with the help of their head coach and with the organization being, nose to the grindstone, do what Calgary, Winnipeg, and other great teams that have great runs with being in the conversation when it comes to the Grey Cup each and every year. That helps develop a fan base. And I think whether it's true or not, we'll find out. But I truly believe there has been a pivot point created by what happened this year in the Eastern Final. I truly believe that. Having gone to all the games, have been to all the games, have listened to the fans, have watched what was going on. This year was different. I promise you that, Mark. But we're going to find out, and here's the key. We're going to find out how the season tickets go. We always hear, oh, it's going great, but it seems to look the same. Maybe this is the year where we'll hear it's going great, and then we go to the game, right, David? We'll see that it is going great. So that'll be the telltale sign. Nothing that we hear or think in the offseason is going to answer that question. The question will begin to be answered day one, game one of the season at BMO.
Well, two things. First of all, that was an amazing crowd in Toronto up for the East Final. And I got to say, when the Stampeders were there in August, right in the middle of the CNE, it was tremendous as well. It was very boisterous and passionate crowd there. And like you say, maybe this will, people are there, talk about the great time they had and encourage somebody else to happen. And I think Pinball Clemens is right. This team, like from 17 to 22, they collapsed. They were terrible for a couple of years. They're not just not winning the Grey Cup. They were terrible. They were awful. But it happened from 12 to 17 as well. They fell completely apart. You can't just operate with the one good season every 5 years, right?
You remember a couple of years ago, Calgary coming into Toronto. What was it, 60 something?
Yeah, something like that. I can't remember, but yeah,
it was horrible.
Yeah.
That's a home game.
Yeah,
that's not how you sell tickets.
No. But that's just it. I think Pinball's right. And you look back at his record when he was running the team, he did maintain the team, at least in the Grey Cup conversation every year, not just rising from the ashes every 5 or so years, because that's what they've done of late. And you're dead on. It's a really tough sell. You look by coincidence on the ESPN Classic Canada channel, which I and a handful of others watch, but they had the 2004 Grey Cup on between the Argos that they won with Pinball Clemens as coach. They stayed good for a few years. He left, and it fell apart again. So it is an issue to be continuously a threat.
Well, you're a witness to what happens when a team starts to fade. A great team, when a great team becomes less than great. We saw it in BC. We've seen it in Montreal. We've seen it in a lot of places. I mean, even in Calgary, you had a short time there where the fans were concerned this is a team that's not going to do what it's done in the past. I'm not saying that it was a surprise that they've maintained the great level of play, but I think even in Calgary, there were some fans that were going, well, I guess that was a good run. Fans are very fickle. Fans are very fickle. You want their money. You're going to have to satisfy them and entertain them.
Oh, yeah, no question. It's, you have to reintroduce yourself, reinvigorate people year after year. There's a hardcore that'll be there no matter. but you have to reinvigorate the others. And, those are what the successful teams do by being good on the field and maintaining a good presence off the field in the off season.
Well, that I think you said it right there. The presence in the off season. I will give Enoch Mwamba the biggest credit because he's become he has fully embraced everything that has happened since the end of that game. As DeVarge Daniels put out on his social media, he's finally going to be available to get that cup away from Enoch Mwamba, because everywhere you go, you can see the Great Cup. Enoch Mwamba is right beside it. Like today, he was I think he was at City Hall out in Mississauga. Yesterday, I don't know how Enoch wasn't there, but Corey Mace had the cup at San Rainbow Bakery, which is a very famous one in Toronto. And you're seeing that with the Grey Cup, winning the Grey Cup, you get to go out to the community and say, look at this accomplishment as a team, and getting this and getting a little more recognition from the market.
Mm-hmm.
The team just
good.
It
Well,
feels
good
a lot different from 2017. Just from, I think, the players being more willing to, having a player like Enoch Mwamba more willing to go out into the community and do these things.
That's good to hear. Yeah, it looks like he's been, what I've seen, very aggressive in getting out there and has that real infectious personality too.
Absolutely. And there really is it really is important that MLSC use the power that they have to help promote the team. And they were justifiably criticized early in their ownership. They had they have events, and they promote all their teams, right? But for the longest time, absent from the group of teams, and that includes the American Hockey League Marlies. Uh, the Argos weren't a part of the group. When the stadium didn't have them on, the hockey arena didn't have them on. It had every other team, regardless of whether, all these simple little things, they'll make a difference. Now that MLSC's, I think they've been falsely accused of not caring about the team. I've drawn a conclusion which could be inaccurate and incomplete and maybe totally wrong. I don't know. I don't think they know how to develop or build a fan base. They're an organization that has been spoiled by the opportunities of being found in success.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, what do you have to do to promote the Maple Leafs? What do you have to do? Nothing. Just count the money. That's all you got to do. And even the soccer team, it wasn't they that built the game. It was a game that was already built in our community here, and they had a league that knew how to get out there, and it had the names New York, Chicago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera involved. So I think MLSC needed to learn how to build an organization and the development of a fan base. And I think that development is something of a Rubik's Cube for, MLSC, who weren't accustomed to doing that kind of thing. So that's what I tried explaining to people was my thought and theory. It wasn't that they didn't care about the Argos. They didn't know how to care about the Argos.
Good point, because they certainly don't lack for cash. They just got to spend it in the right way, and I hope it works for them for sure.
Well, now what happens is David will attest, and he mentioned San Remo Bakery. It's a heavy Italian. It's downtown Little Italy. That's where it is. And what you see now is you see MLSC embracing, the Argos. The Leafs had these sweaters that they were giving. The Argos had these sweaters they were giving away, and at practice, the Leafs were wearing them. It's that kind of stuff that will help, because the biggest problem, by extension, the Canadian Football League too, not just the Toronto Argos, is the perception of minor league or not good enough that the Canadian Football League has, not in Calgary. So don't send me cards and letters, folks. In Toronto and the big megalopolis that it is, that there's far more competition here for people's eyes and for attention. So there has to be an accelerated pace in as far as getting into people's view. That's the hardest challenge that the Canadian Football League has in Toronto, in my opinion. And I think by extension, it also extends to Montreal and BC as well, because those populaces have a more refined feeling about what pro sports should be or look like.
Hope it works in Toronto, because it'd be wonderful to have them as a league leader on the field and off the field as well.
Well, Montreal and BC have made great strides too. With the Argos winning the cup, I hope them Argos winning the cup doesn't cast such a wide shadow that people forget that in the Eastern Division, again, I keep sounding like I'm promoting and I work for the Eastern Division of the Canadian Football League, but the division has improved, and it's important that Montreal be something, and BC in the West, as you know. The ownership there immediately had an impact, and it's important that our ownership of these teams need to be proactive and underline pro. They got to be proactive, because it's not the CFL isn't it. And I'm going on a diatribe now. It's not that they're a tough sell. It's you just have to help people understand what you're selling. Too many people don't know what you're buying when you buy the CFL.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. Yeah, for sure.
Frank, before Eduardo cuts the core on you, I think maybe it's time that we.
Oh, geez. All right. Listen, thanks for joining us, Mark.
Yeah.
And
Enjoy.
I love what you do. Follow you very closely in Calgary, and you're a great promoter of our game.
Thank you. Enjoyed it very much, and good to talk football, even if it's mid-December. It's fine by me. Thanks.
We love talking football. Thank you, David. As usual, thanks a whole bunch.
Thank you, Frank.
He's David Morassutti, and that's Mark Steven. Thank you for watching. We're here every Monday at 9:00 for CFL Talk. And if you want to watch anything to do with news, entertainment, and sports, Spanglish Sports World's a place where you can check it out. Spanglishworld.ca. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thanks for watching, everybody.